Hello and welcome to Your Conestoga Today. I'm your host, Mamuzo. Now, today we will be exploring one of the very interesting and passionate topics that personally I find very timely to discuss, a research project carried out by Conestoga College on the transit systems of newcomers, especially international students in the region of Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo. And we have a guest who is not just talking about academic systems, but also humanizing the project work around transit systems for these newcomers. Please join me. Welcome Pam Johnson. She is a professor here at Conestoga College, one who is highly respected, by the way, as she is a professor of community and social service management here at Conestoga College. Hello, Pam.
Hi, Mamuzo. Thanks for having me. So good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And like I told you off camera, personally, I feel like what you have done with your team is amazing. It's great because when we talk about newcomer experiences in the region, we often focus on, oh, what are the resources for food, for this? We don't really look into the transit system and see how. Are people feeling a sense of belonging when they commute from their places of work or to school? And that is what your project has done. It has exposed us to the experiences, the lived experiences of students and the newcomers who now live in our community. So thank you for a job well done to you and your team for looking into 300 newcomer students. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So my team is comprised of Amandeep Anu, a brilliant student who's just about to graduate, and Ashwati George, another brilliant student who's about to graduate. So we were basically, our research project did both survey and focus groups of students here at Conestoga College on 2 campuses.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's start a conversation with the heart of the project. Now, what inspired the study on the social welfare and public transit experiences of newcomer students to our region?
Yeah, I think as a person who's, a social scientist, somebody who does social science research and also a very active community member, I've been watching the alarming number of incidences of racism and both violent and physical, often harassment that's been happening across Canada for more than 10 years now. Which is very concerning to see those increases. Of course, during COVID, we saw an uptick of that aggression increasing in in places of public transit, but across it. Of course, we know that racism and things like Islamophobia or other types of biases, homophobia, etc., those are systemic issues, but they show up in spaces like public transit. What made me interested was that a few of my students over time, as I gained their trust and they felt comfortable with me, they started reporting to me about some of the scary incidences that were happening for them on the bus. And so I really wanted to understand, first of all, what was happening, how often it was happening, whether or not they had mechanisms to report these issues. And so it was more informal. And then about a year and a half ago, I actually reached out to people within the college and through the Grand River Transit and Brantford Transit to really try to see what was happening and try to see whether or not that we could make some sort of changes within the college, but also within transit systems based on the feedback of students. And thus far, we hadn't seen any research projects that had been done specifically with newcomer racialized students in Canada.
Fantastic. A very good way to start this conversation. Now, can you tell us why you chose the Grand River Transit and the Brantford Transit as your case studies?
Yeah, so Mamuzo, it's actually like more simple than you'd think. The first of all, I wanted to focus on 2 campuses only because I received a really generous bit of money through SHRC, which was an NSERC or a synergy, grant through our research department, but it wasn't a huge grant. So I knew that I needed to keep the focus a bit small. I mean, we have, thousands and thousands of students we could be asking about their experiences, but I wanted to focus on 2 campuses, specifically campuses where I had classes too. So that's where I started. So, and Grand River Transit provides public transit through trains and buses to a number of our students, and of course in Brantford as well. So that's kind of where I started. That's why I focused on those 2 areas, those 2 geographic areas.
Okay, that's great. So this is a multi-stakeholder collaboration effort, I believe. And what was it like working with internal partners like Conestoga Students Incorporated and external ones like the transit authorities and the EDI consultants you worked with?
Yeah, it's been amazing actually, especially our internal consultants or sort of partners on this project have been so helpful. So we had former colleague Barry Prasima, Townsend, who was working in access and accommodation rather here at the college. We have Banjo, who's been working with us as well. We have Justin from CSI. We've had colleagues from the International Student Department. And when we first went and spoke to these colleagues, me and another student, we found that they were hearing the same reports. They were hearing the same concerning reports from students. And like I'll share with you, there's some really good news stories too, but a lot of them are quite concerning and show a pattern of systemic racism that is happening throughout our region. So having them on board was absolutely essential because the idea too was that we knew that recommendations would be coming out of this project, and we really wanted to have as many people on board as possible. The public transit providers, I have to say, I was like really pleasantly surprised. I wasn't sure how they would respond to this project, and they were very welcoming. They wanted to know what they could do. They wanted to understand better what was happening. And so they came on board a few leaders within their within their ranks. And so they've been a part of our conversations all along.
Thank you, Pam. Again, I say thank you because this is one big issue for many students and we're trying to fix it. Let's start with the stories you gathered and the data you gathered from the 300 Newcomer students. What surprised you most from those stories? And as you do your reflections, what are those key takeaways for you?
Yeah, I think first of all, in terms of our surveys, our survey was pretty lengthy. So some students sort of rushed through it. Others really took the time to answer not just the demographic, data focused questions. They're more qualitative questions. We heard some sometimes very shocking stories about people's experiences, some very scary stories. Everything from, people being harassed by other people on the bus, other citizens on the bus, sometimes getting mistreatment from bus drivers, although that was more rare. But watching how students basically will sometimes change their behavior. They would actually avoid, and this is some of what we saw in the research, is that people actually who are racialized, who are newcomers, will actually change their routes and go halfway around the city to avoid certain buses or certain people on the bus, which is outrageous. But it's really, for a lot of newcomers, the bus system is the most affordable system for them because half of people who are coming are living in poverty. And so it's very, very difficult. Often too, sometimes people apologizing to the people who are being rude or harassing them, as though it was their own problem, right? Yeah. So we had, a significant number of the students are younger than 30. They're like 79% of them were younger than 30 years old. They were 55% women, 45% men as they identified. There were about 4.5% of the people who identified as people living with disabilities. I think what was maybe shocking to me, as you were asking, was the amount of policing that people are doing on themselves and on each other sometimes. Almost buying into the racism the narrative that they're hearing from people, which is pervasive, right? We're hearing that even from political leadership about housing, blaming immigrants about housing, which is outrageous. When we look at the numbers and we look at the patterns of lack of affordable housing in Canada, there's no correlation between the two, but you have to dig a bit deeper. There's a number of really great researchers that are doing that work right now, but I think it's in line with a lot of the racism that we're seeing and increasingly in Ontario. But here in southwestern Ontario, unfortunately, we're seeing really, really high numbers, and it's been published recently, of not only racism, but Islamophobia, homophobia, happening in our region. So really wanted to make sure that we were uncovering some of these stories rather than pretending that they're not there. It's often really easy just to cover them up, or we're not seeing those nuanced stories within our media. And I feel like it's really important that we expose it and we look at what we have control over so that we can try to influence it, recognizing that it's a culture that is quite unhealthy.
It is.
Yeah.
It is so unhealthy. And I know you had a meeting in April. Tell us about the meeting, the outcome, and maybe we could just take a sneak peek into what happened during that meeting. Yeah.
Sure. So the meeting in April, Mamuzo, was like our follow-up. So we started these conversations with folks back this year, back in spring last year. Everyone was on board wanting to know how they could help out. We met again in October, and this project takes almost like the format of a participatory action research project, meaning that the questions were formed by people with lived experience, like students. We also wanted input from the transit providers to say what kind of questions you want to ask. So all of this to say was that it took a long time for us to get that through. The April meeting was really about us looking at our preliminary results with our colleagues. And the response was really positive, a bit of shock and concern, but really wanting to know what they can do. They wouldn't have signed on to this if they didn't want to know what they could do. I really feel that. And I think that my colleagues who are students with lived experience, they also were quite positive hearing those kinds of responses from both transit providers and also other colleagues from the college.
Okay, so that meeting was with the transit authorities.
That's right.
Were we able to get the leadership, the government into the conversation, or not yet?
We were able to meet with one of the transit providers. Couldn't make it. There was an issue with somebody like retiring. But anyways, we had one of the transit providers there. They had a couple of their staff. And so what they were looking for was basically when we finalized all of our recommendations, they wanted to see those officially in a report. So I'm finalizing that report now. And that will be shared with them. And hopefully we see some action. But I'm wanting to meet with our colleagues here at the college too and see what we can do about better informing students about what they can anticipate, but where they can go for help.
Okay. So apart from racism, Islamophobia, and the other things that you mentioned, three things also stood out: safety, infrastructure, and language barriers.
Yes.
And how does this compound for the students?
Oh my gosh. I mean, if you think about language issues, a lot of students are coming to Conestoga College and they know like 4 or 5 languages. They know a ton of languages, but English might be their 3rd, 4th, or 5th language. And so then they're trying to translate everything as they're going along. I can't even imagine. I mean, I have 3 languages. Translating into those languages is exhausting. If you've ever had to do it, right? You go home at nighttime and you have like a headache, you're overwhelmed, you're exhausted, right? So you think about students having to deal with that, navigating a new place, new culture, new expectations, and then new spaces. It's really difficult. So I think that often when we heard about some of the safety issues was often like misunderstandings, cultural misunderstandings, cross-cultural mix-ups, and really so not knowing the do's and don'ts of certain spaces, but at the same time holding the students up to a higher account than people who are Canadian, or rather white people in Canada. So a lot of the students would say, somebody was yelling at me for doing this small action, but then I saw somebody who was like a Caucasian person on the bus doing the same thing and they didn't get called out for it. So I think, in terms of that safety, there is a greater risk. We saw in some of the studies we looked at too, specifically people who are experiencing Islamophobia, actually being really fearful of getting on the bus at nighttime because that's often when their harassment's the worst. And it happens not just on the buses, mostly it's happening at the bus stations where they're by themselves. And I can share later on some of the accounts that we heard just from students that we heard from in terms of those actions. So you said safety, you said
safety, infrastructure, and language barriers.
And in terms of infrastructure, I think the other thing too, and we're starting to see actually this spring and summer, which is really positive, some new bus shelters going up. A lot of students sort of standing in snowbanks and going like, being scared, not knowing where to go, standing in horrible inclement weather. Like, I mean, all citizens here who are sort of like this miserable.
I had my own experience, a very unpleasant experience. I was going to Milton as a student then, and I wanted to board a bus. Now, I don't even remember the exact location right now. I know it's somewhere around Duke. And, there's the left side of the road and the right side of the road. And I was naively standing on the wrong side of the road thinking because it has the same tag, the same, what's it, G7, whatever, same tag. And, I was there for over 20 minutes. I froze up in the snow thinking, oh, but my phone is showing the bus is here. And I never saw the bus.
Oh.
That day I had frostbite.
Oh.
I ended up taking a cab all the way from Kitchener to Milton because I just couldn't deal with.
That's it. That's
miserable.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things, like, I think sometimes people who are Canadian will minimize it because they have their own lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're brand new, you don't know where you're going. And often getting on the bus on the right side of the street, depending on what the system is you're used to back home, like, maybe people driving on the left versus the right. And so I think that getting through all of those things can be really overwhelming, but also scary for people, right? So, yeah, my goodness. Brutal, right?
Brutal,
yes,
brutal. Okay, we'll come to that winter story again because I want to show you a picture much later in the show. But now let's talk about, I feel it's heartbreaking to see that some of these incidents have not been reported.
Mm.
And it's a question of, we know the smart, what can we do? But first of all, tell me, are there systems in place to report these incidences and how are they handled?
So there are systems in place for both Grand River Transit and Brantford Transit to report concerns. There were differences in terms of both feedback. A lot of people were saying that they didn't hear back, or when they heard back, there weren't significant changes made to sort of address the issue, not a lot of investigation. And so I think in terms of those mechanisms, it's people maybe are discouraged or not totally sure what they're supposed to do. But a lot of students were saying that they're also not reporting because they're worried about their status. So again, not having that security of saying I'm a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, I don't want to complain in case that's going to be leveraged against me, which is a horrible experience. And you can think about how far-reaching that is. It's not just transit systems. What if somebody assaulted you? What if somebody was being, or a professor was being abusive towards you? If you're not willing to speak up because you're scared about your security in a place, that means that you are so much more vulnerable than other people.
You are.
Right? So, yeah.
It's deep.
It is deep. And it's wide. Yeah.
So one of the findings was lack of follow-up when concerns were raised, like you mentioned.
Yes.
Now, what does this tell us about institutional trust? Because now it's, of course, exposes the fact that newcomers don't trust the system to help them navigate these challenges.
Yeah.
And that's why personally I'm concerned about how can we get the government involved, because I see here there's a lack of maybe training, education, information. People need to know that this is my right and to feel like you belong here. I mean, you don't have to be a PR or citizen to have a voice, to speak up for yourself. So what do you have to say to that, Pam?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a few issues here. So I think that in terms of the systems for reporting, a lot of students, we've had personal conversations with people too, just like informal conversations as we were inviting people in for focus group discussions. But in the focus group discussions, they were happening with the research students that I had hired, right? What I was hearing from people and also from their conversations with students was that a lot of people were saying, like, this is systemic. Like, what's the point of doing this? So really feeling like, what are we going to do about this? This is really frustrating. We're telling our stories, but is anything going to be done about it? It's kind of like, honestly, the experience of so many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, right? When they're sharing their stories, what's the follow-up? We're telling you these traumatic experiences. Is there going to be anything done about it? And so even sharing the stories takes a lot of courage because, first of all, it's like trusting you with what are you going to do with it? Is there going to be follow-up? So I think trusting the system and those systems is really doesn't seem to be there. I think that we can build it by showing that there can be responses that are thoughtful, that are caring. I think that some of the recommendations do filter through to transit providers and to the college, but it's not enough. So, we have some recommendations that are very targeted that I think will be helpful, but I think we can't stop there. We've got to do so much more than what we've done so far. This is like a mini project, but I feel that we can sort of expand this work and really think about long-lasting impacts, because systemic racism is not going to be solved by one one training session. This is like deeply embedded in our society. And for so many students too, they'll show up to Canada thinking, hey, I thought this was a pretty inclusive place. I heard all of these great things about Canada. And they come here and they're like, this is the first time I've ever experienced racism in my life, actually. I've experienced other types of bias, but never racism. And it's a horrible feeling when you're still trying to figure out your way around a place and you're trying to find a space of belonging in your new home. So, and you're by yourself. You've lost all your social capital. You've left it back home. Your family, your people, right?
Yeah.
It's so scary. And people, I don't think Canadians really appreciate how much sacrifice people make by coming here, right? Giving up all of that safety and coming here. And then on top of it, having to deal with all of these other systemic biases. So I hope I answered your question. I'm sorry.
You speak so passionately about this thing. And I can so resonate with what you're saying because, of course, I'm a newcomer myself. I've been through some of the biases, but maybe we'll keep that for some other conversation. You spoke about recommendations, and I quite agree with you. We cannot solve this in one sitting with one train and even by one group. But what I believe is, where can we start? I mean, for someone who has done this project, of course, it's an ongoing project, but what would be that one thing that we could start to do right now that could start to, cause some sort of change in how we view ourselves and how we relate and how we can feel safe and a sense of belonging here?
Yeah. I think first of all, we have to be a lot more honest about what's happening in our communities and not pretend like things are great. And I think that unfortunately, like as a white person, I've never experienced racism. And unfortunately, I think it's easy for people just to pretend it's not there because it's never been your lived experience. But it is the experience of your family, your extended family, your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues. So it's about addressing that, making sure that we are getting some training and exposure to information, letting it in. Not denying it, letting it in. It's like everybody's experienced different types of challenges in their lives, but allowing yourself to believe it and see it. When somebody tells you that they are experiencing racism, first believe them. The other thing that we can do, certainly as a college, and I think we often are doing really great work, honestly, about trying to inform students about what to expect when they get here. So we try to like jam in as much information.
We don't call her anything.
Right? It's like, here we go. But I think the other thing that can come in is, having a bit more information as soon as people arrive about the bus systems and making sure that those things are translated. Information is translated into several different languages. We think about the most commonly used languages of students in our colleges. We can translate that information. We can provide that information as people are heading out to the bus station. So in that first week of orientation, I think also letting them know that there are systems to provide feedback and complaints and let people know what their concerns are. Their concerns are valid and they're important for them to share. We might see an uptick if we understand what those issues are. Perhaps that's a collaboration that we need to also have with the transit providers to make sure that that information is being tracked. I think the other thing too is making sure that we have mechanisms in place for complaint follow-up. So checking in with people and saying like, how quickly did somebody check in with you? What was the resolution? Was there anything that sort of happened out of this? The nature of the concerns that students brought up are too serious for us to just pretend that they're not happening. In some cases, like we're talking about verbal harassment. We're talking about people not being allowed on the bus. Like it's some of these incidences are just out and out racism and for some people physical intimidation. So we can't just pretend that they're not there. So there's a number of recommendations that we have in the report that we'll follow up with both Conestoga and the transit providers to hopefully help out.
That is amazing, Pam, and thank you for sharing those insights. And I'm hoping that we are all listening and we're also taking notes because this is a notes-taking session for action to be taken afterwards. Okay, so I would like you to please speak to that student who has been harassed on a bus and feels invisible. What would be your advice to that student? The student who feels like, well, my opinion doesn't count. I'd rather just preserve, do what I can to get my PR and just keep to myself. Like, what would be your advice to that person?
First of all, what's happened to you is not fair. It's not fair. It's potentially criminal what's happened. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve this. And I believe you, and I hope that you find other people in your life to believe you. But I want you to know that you have places where you can go where people believe you. So that's my greatest hope, is that they hear that, and that by you coming forward and sharing those concerns, we have the opportunity to build a more robust system. But coming forward whenever you've experienced any kind of harassment or even assault is terrifying for people. That is not the first sort of response. People tend to like either internalize it, pretend it hasn't happened. And it's often because the responses they're watery. They're not enough. So I think that's what I want to say to them, is letting them know that there are people who are going to believe them, that are going to support them. And just to say that if you're seeing something happening, please note it. If you're too scared to intervene, make sure that afterwards, perhaps you can go up and just let that person know that you saw what happened, so that you can be a witness. And if you're a Canadian and you feel really secure on the bus, feel free to say something. We've seen interventions from lots of Canadians in the last several years when there's assault or just somebody being horrible on a bus or in a transit system, or even in public. And so it can be scary to do that, but we can't sit by and just pretend this isn't happening. You know, we see that, like, 60% of newcomers say that they've been harassed in spaces of public transit, 80% of Indigenous people. So we're talking about the First Peoples of Canada, right? Or of Turtle Island, right? These are Indigenous people. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. So the best we can do too as bystanders is making sure that we are paying attention, that we're letting people know that we're here to support, and that we're also keeping track of the information and witnessing what's happening.
That's right. And what about the driver who is driving the bus, who is open and perhaps, can sort of make a change right there and then?
Yeah.
What would be your response to that driver? What role can he play?
Yeah, I think he or she really have the opportunity to also witness and try to intervene. I know that it's difficult, though. Sometimes they're also dealing with, they have timelines. They're trying to get to places. There's expectations. They also, they're not security people. They're experts in driving the bus and getting people safely to where they're supposed to go, right? So we have heard incidences where drivers have intervened, have been supportive to people on the bus. We've got lots of really great people working, and an increasingly a diverse group of people working on the buses. And I think that students really feel a lot safer too, sometimes speaking with people who are also racialized individuals, or people who are brown or black who are driving the buses. They feel a little more comfortable with those folks. But I think that what I would say is just to say that, these people are on your bus. If there's anything that you can do, because this is your domain, if there's anything that you can do to intervene and support people. I know that one student was saying that her experience in living in the UK for a while was that the bus drivers would actually stop the bus and just not proceed. If there was any harassment happening on the bus, they would just stop the bus entirely until the person got off or they called security. So there's different ways of intervening. And I know that our transit providers are doing a lot of that training already, but I think we need to figure out what else we can do. And so again, some of those things are in the recommendations around safety.
Okay, just more. Yeah, when you spoke about recommendations earlier, you did provide us with some ideas on how the school itself can also help educate newcomer students. Let's talk about city leadership. What can the city do I don't know if they've got the reports yet, but if they do get the report, and when they do get the report, what can they do to also ensure that people feel a sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think, so depending on who's sort of overseeing the transit system. So for the GRT, the folks who are overseeing, it's the region of Waterloo. It's not the city of Kitchener.
Yes.
And so I think it's about us really understanding where we're going to go to have those conversations. I think that a lot of our cities and towns and regions have strategic plans that focus on things like strategic plans that focus on newcomer strategies, diversity, inclusion, and equity opportunities. So I think within that is looking at concrete actions that are being made under your purview, which for a region is going to be public transit, public spaces. It might have influence in schools and districts. So I think it's thinking about where you have a degree of control and where can you resource those sorts of activities, and then making sure that you have measures to see how things are going. I know that they have a lot of those initiatives, but it's really important for people like us from the community to give them that information, that data, to keep them up to date on what's happening.
You know, we often talk about data. I mean, numbers, statistics, and those are great, but these are stories of real people. And how has this discovery through your research project, helped shape your view about day-to-day living in the city?
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, I know for the student researchers who are working for me, it was often very triggering for them to hear these stories because they've either experienced it or they've had close friends who've experienced it. Very uncomfortable to hear those stories. It's almost like somebody who's experienced sexualized assault, hearing the stories over and over again of people who've experienced sexualized assault. It was really difficult for them. For me, as somebody who's a step removed, certainly I've been a public transit user, but I've never been a person who's experienced racism or Islamophobia. So for me, witnessing it, but knowing that there's a bunch of students that I've had that I really care about, knowing that they've experienced that and seeing their stories on paper, just, I guess it's heart-wrenching. It's worrisome. I don't want to see that kind of behavior in my community. I don't want to be passive as a passive actor in those situations. So, for me, it was hard to see that, but I was also hearing some heartening stories too of how people are connecting with people within their community, how they're asserting themselves. And in situations, one student in particular came forward and basically said, like, every single incident I've had, I've gone forward and I've reported it.
Oh, that's good.
Now, they weren't getting a lot of feedback about it, but they said, no matter what, I keep showing up and letting them know what's going on. So they're really secure in themselves and knowing that they have to share this information, but that's not everybody's story.
That's not everybody's story. Now, I want to show you a picture, Pam,
Sure.
just because I want us to be I like that we're having this conversation and you've actually humanized this challenge for us so we can see the human elements and how it's playing out. Can we just share that picture on the screen? I would like for you to respond to this picture, Pam. And my question for you would be, if you could change one thing in this scene, what would it be? Hopefully we have all our authority leaders listening and then we could see how we could transform that. Okay, now this is the picture. We do have, I'm assuming that's a newcomer right now, who is heading towards the bus. It's a snowy day, and then the shelter you could see the bus stop it's not fully sheltered, so it only has a coffee on the back.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that the transit systems are really trying to modernize their systems by putting everything on the phone, right? Again, when people arrive, they don't necessarily know those systems or how to access them. So making sure that people have easy access, maybe they get a little bit of training here at the college because they come here first, right? And we give them orientation and say like, hey, this is how you can get the schedule so you can understand how to access the bus. Letting people know that how to dress for situations like that. I think, seeing that they're starting to put more shelters out, increasing some of that. I think, if this was a nighttime scene, I would really, maybe we're seeing transit systems providing a bit more security. People driving by and just checking to see how people are doing as they're waiting for buses at nighttime. So I think making sure that people understand, first of all, where they should be standing for the bus, having translated materials for the bus, understanding how to use the apps. Not everybody's also going to have unlimited data or access to a really good phone to be able to check these things out. So having some of this information up on a board that's accessible to them, sort of quick reference. And a lot of the stations do have that, but I think that we could look through that really carefully. But I think what's most important is to make sure that you are speaking to people with lived experience as a newcomer, maybe as a student, to go through this, almost like an audit checklist that you would do around accessibility and say, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
Is there something else that we could be doing? Having people, maybe on staff or as consultants to help with that, that would help immensely in terms of making sure that there's a good user design in the way that we do those sorts of things. Yeah.
And that is such great wisdom, Pam. Thank you for sharing it with us today. Before I let you go, I imagine being in a bus right now and they're different people. There is the newcomer students, the driver, the Canadian, the indigenous person, and a whole lot of others. Could you please help us? How can we, in few words, how can we create a safer, more inclusive transit for everyone, not just the newcomer now, for everyone in this mix?
Well, if I can speak first to my sister, fellow Canadians, is just that to recognize that when somebody's coming on the bus, first of all, don't assume that they're not from Canada, especially if they're a racialized person. Of course, they could have easily been grown up in Canada, but if you see somebody behaving in such a way that it's like either putting themselves at risk or, it's not quite the rules on the bus, gently talk to them and say, "Hi, how are you doing? Just want to let you know there's a bus stop coming up here. This is where we're going to put your stroller. Can I help you with this?" Approaching people in a kind way, in a welcoming way, is going to make a difference. You can help shape someone's behavior for their own safety and well-being as others by showing them gently. The other thing is that pay attention to what's happening and how that person's faring on the bus. If you see somebody who's being harassed or treated unfairly, pay attention to it. Be an ally to those people. I think for people who are just coming to Canada, try to seek out as much information as you can about what it's like to be on the bus, how to navigate those systems. And, it's easy. I think going to those places like the school, like the college, your workplaces might not have that information, but ideally, maybe we see this information also in our libraries and other spaces, maybe in our grocery stores, where people can grab that information easily just to understand how to navigate those systems. And just, I think that's it. It's just like trying to be kinder, recognizing that somebody who's behaving differently than what you see typically is not about annoying you. It's recognizing that that person's story is so much more complex than you could possibly imagine. And the best way that you can address that situation is not to get angry, but to be kind.
Your project, it's really, is going to foster, I believe, a lot of empathy. And that's what we need to stay together as a community to drive, a sense of ownership that we all belong here.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work that you and your team have done in revealing to us, this very unpleasant situation that happens on a day-to-day while people commute to work, to school, and to their various places. Thank you again, Pam. And to you, our audience, thank you so much for always being curious. And that's why you were here today, because you wanted to learn something new. We're grateful for your time and for the connection. And don't forget to follow us on CCDTV.ca on all of our social media platforms. And you heard the words that Pam just shared with us. You too can make a difference. Be a little kinder, a little more empathetic. And we want a world where we all will be comfortable to say that we all live in a city that we all own. All right. Until next time, I'm your host, Mamuzo. It's been great speaking with you today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.